Hello and welcome to Ask the Native Doctor, Demystifying COVID-19 in California Indian Country. My name is Isaiah Metters.
And I'm Hannah Redlick.
This series is sponsored by the California Rural Indian Health Board, and our goal is to break down some of these tough medical concepts so that us everyday people can understand them better.
Today, we're talking vaccines. How do vaccines actually work? Is the COVID vaccine similar to ones we've had in the past? Is it different? All of those questions are going to be answered for us today by Dr. Antoinette Martinez.
And the first thing that we wanted to do, Dr. Martinez, is get a little bit of your background. Would you be kind enough to share us some of your history, how you got here?
Okay, so I am a family medicine physician, and I've been in practice for over 10 years. I went to medical school later in life. I am Chumash Native, and that is from Santa Barbara and San Ynez areas. I currently work for United Indian Health Services up at Arcata, California. I have 2 adult children and 3 grandchildren, and they are very important to me in my life. They are more important than myself. And then comes my tribe and my community.
Wonderful. Okay, great. The first question that we have is, how does a traditional vaccine work?
Well, I'm going to go basic. So a traditional vaccine is developed in order to strengthen someone's immune system so that they will fight whatever that foreign invader is, which is either a virus or bacteria usually. And that takes a little bit of work. Our immune system is usually very strong and robust. But when we encounter a new bacteria or virus that has defense mechanisms that keep us from fighting it, that's where we need the vaccines. And the vaccines help to protect us by working with our immune system. So it's kind of like a collaboration.
So we know that with the first 2 COVID vaccines that came out, the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine, those were a little bit different than traditional vaccines, right? So it was, I think I heard the term mRNA vaccine. And how does that differ from a traditional vaccine that a lot of us have received?
Well, to tell you the truth, my first inclination is there are so many different vaccines, there is no real traditional vaccine. So you've got the live vaccine, which is literally a live virus. That is used for measles, mumps, rubella, and varicella. Then you've got vaccines for children, the Haemophilus influenza type B vaccine, which is a little more complicated because that bacteria actually has a sugar coating on it. And what that vaccine does is it primes the immune system to see that sugar coating, not the bacteria itself, and develop antibodies against it. So basically what I'm saying is a traditional vaccine primes the immune system, educates it about this foreign invader. And it tries to find some way by looking at the virus itself through a live vaccine, or through a piece of the virus or bacteria through an inactivated vaccine, or by other things such as a conjugate vaccine, which is what the Hib vaccine is. So there are numerous different ways science has helped us to find protective mechanisms for our own immune system to fight off these viruses and bacteria.
Wow. Yeah, okay, that's amazing. It's kind of comforting to know, when the COVID vaccines were first coming out, I know a lot of people were really concerned about the mRNA aspect of the vaccine. And, because we don't always recognize that our vaccines have always used a lot of different methods to really be effective. So it's good to know that science is always progressing and it's not a one thing fixes all. And so, that's really comforting to know that there's already been a lot of progression in the vaccine world.
Yeah, it's clever business.
Mm. So the first issue for the COVID virus is that it has this ever evolving change in and around its coding. The spike protein is getting more and more aggressive in entering the human body. And it does that by entering the angiotensin, what's called the ACE inhibitor. So angiotensin converting enzyme receptor. Okay, don't need to worry about the details on that, but those receptors are throughout our body. And so the virus has innumerable ways to enter the body through these receptors. The new vaccines that have been developed are developed to help our own immune system latch on to that spike protein and kill the virus. Okay, so now you have different ways of getting to this, but we need that spike protein. So what these vaccines have done is we've developed a messenger RNA, and a vector through a shell of a virus to get the information to our own body to make the spike protein. Now, the spike protein by itself isn't going to do anything to our body because it's not the COVID virus. It's only this piece of it. And so that protein is disseminated throughout the body after the vaccine, after our body has recognized it and made the protein, because it's actually our own body and our cells that have made the protein. It's disseminated through our bloodstream, and then our own immune system sees that foreign invader and develops antibodies against it.
So you mentioned a little bit too about the viral vector vaccine, and I'm less familiar with that one because that's the newer one from Johnson & Johnson. Is that correct?
That is correct, and it's also the one that was developed by AstraZeneca as well. So right now we have Johnson & Johnson that is available under emergency use authorization, as well as the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna. And so yes, Johnson & Johnson vaccine is the viral vector. Again, it's not a live virus. It's the shell of an adenovirus, which is like the common cold virus, but it's really a transporter of genetic information for our own cells to make the spike protein. I know people are suspicious about these new vaccines because it didn't take long to develop them. And I was a little suspicious initially and did my own research. And really, it took them 8 to 10 years of scientific development to come up with this. What they didn't have was a pandemic before. And so once this pandemic hit, scientists actively looked at that as a mechanism to help fight this virus.
So we already had enough stuff going on, in not a crisis scenario that we could like dust off some old petri dishes and be like, okay, we got a base on this one. Let's go after it.
Yeah, it is nice to know that this is science that has been around for a while, because all the news did make it sound like, oh, they just came up with this overnight and we're all guinea pigs. But it's good to know that this is something that they've been studying for many years.
Yes, absolutely.
Are both the mRNA vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna, and the viral vector vaccine, Johnson & Johnson, equally effective? Is one a better option?
That is an excellent question. They're both great options. And so we tell people, get the vaccine that is available to you rather than waiting. So important message. They are different and their effectiveness is a little bit different. So Pfizer and Moderna have between a 94.5% and above effectiveness rate called efficacy. That means that of 100 people studied, 4 to 5 people did show symptoms of COVID. So they had COVID. But no one ended up dying or in the hospital from it, my understanding. Then Johnson & Johnson has a little bit lower efficacy, and that is about 62 to 70% effectiveness. So if you look at the two, you're going to say, well, I want the one that's more effective. So if you look at the data, 100% of the people who had the Johnson & Johnson vaccine did not die, nor did they get hospitalized from COVID. So they may have become sick, but they didn't end up in the hospital. And that is one of the key things we're trying to prevent, is hospitalization with morbidity and mortality. Mm-hmm. So they both are protective. In addition, Johnson & Johnson is a one-shot deal. The Pfizer and Moderna are 2 shots. You have to wait 2 weeks to 28 days before you can get the second shot. And so sometimes it's also a convenience. You get that one shot, you're done. Then you have to wait 2 weeks afterwards for complete protection for both of those. So they are a little different, but they are protective. How long that protection is for either of them, we don't know. You know, this COVID virus has only been around for 1 year, and we're still learning as we go. I wish we could have been ahead of the game. That's part of my work, is to be preventive and to nip things in the bud. But the COVID virus is completely new. We're still learning. And so we can't say how long this vaccine will work. What we do know is that by having folks vaccinated, they help to decrease the risk of sharing that virus. And when that virus is shared, that virus mutates. And that is the biggest concern right now. When you hear experts saying we're trying to get ahead of it, it's a race against time, because those who are not vaccinated sharing the virus in their bodies, that virus is mutating and becoming more dangerous. So we want to nip that in the bud.
And just in relation to something you were saying earlier too, it's my understanding that one of the huge issues with COVID is that it sends our bodies into an over immune response. So that's what's really becomes dangerous. And so even if you still are exposed to COVID after the vaccine and become sick from it, because your body's already seen that and knows how to fight it, it doesn't go into such a drastic response. Is that right?
That is correct. That is correct. That is part of the thought here, is that if you get sick from it, but again, keep in mind that the immune system is primed and ready for that spike protein once you've had that immunization. So if you do get sick, your symptoms will be decreased, yes.
And this might be a good time too to bring up AstraZeneca, because it's going through a process now of getting its percentages of efficacy out there, and they had some disputes on the percentages and different things like that. Did you want to speak on anything with that? I know it's still very premature because it has not been approved yet in the U.S.
Well, AstraZeneca, has a bit of a controversy because Europe halted dissemination of it when they heard of increased risk of clotting, which then they realized the risk wasn't that high for clotting, from my understanding. So these are things that are evolving as we go. But we know that AstraZeneca also is protective. So I ask people to look at the risks and benefits, risk of maybe a complication from a vaccine versus risk of death. And the long-term morbidity that we don't know about from the COVID vaccine, the long-haul COVID survivors, that's a big concern, how much damage that has caused or will cause in the future.
So now we know that we're not receiving the live active virus in the vaccine, so it's not actually going to make us sick, but some people still experience side effects. So can you explain why they feel like they're sick or they feel those side effects after the vaccine? And I know a lot of people don't. He got the vaccine and seemed to be fine. You could tell he was fighting off a little bit, but some people do have a reaction. I was just wondering why that was.
Well, good question. Some people are really concerned about the side effects. So I have to tease this apart, though, because I did have a patient say that after they heard that somebody who had the vaccine has started having a fever of 102, diarrhea, really sick, absolutely sick. And they attributed that to the vaccine. What we don't know when we vaccinate people is whether they've been exposed to COVID. We don't test for COVID. So somebody who gets a vaccine, if they have the COVID virus and they don't know it, potentially they could get sick with COVID. But the COVID vaccines, both of them are not live COVID viruses, absolutely. So the side effects, of course, the most important thing we want to know from folks is, do you have an allergic reaction to any vaccine? Because we will watch for a little bit longer time after they get their vaccine. So now we get down to the side effects. Okay, so you could get a sore arm, maybe a slight fever, dizziness, headache, but you shouldn't have diarrhea. Really unlikely to have diarrhea. That's pretty I have not heard of that. So those are very common symptoms, especially the soreness in the arm. So we advise people to treat the symptoms, and they should resolve over the course of, 1 to 2 days.
And is quick question, is the reason why that they're not testing patients before giving them the vaccine, is that just because of the speed that we need to get this vaccine into the majority of the population, and that's just another step that's going to delay the timing? Is that the only reason?
I can't completely answer that one. So, but my thought would be that the huge cost of testing people, then waiting 1 to 7 days to get that test result, which won't tell us, if you're waiting 7 days, between those 7 days, that person could get COVID and show up negative. So we could be chasing our tail waiting for them to be negative.
Yeah.
But we do screen for temperatures, signs for COVID before they come in for the vaccine.
Yeah, so one last question for you, Dr. Martinez. Does the vaccine affect American Indians or Alaska Natives differently than others?
Okay, that's a great question, because that's who we really want to get in for their vaccines. American Indians have a 3-time higher rate of death, hospitalization, morbidity compared to the general population. That is not because of genetics. It has to do with in many causes, okay? But it is definitely not genetics that is causing this. And the American Medical Association has made a real clear stand about this for health equity and health justice, that people of all ethnicities, races, all have pretty much the same genetics. It's what has happened in their lifespan and their environment that can change that. We also call that social determinants of health. So going back, American Indians do not have any higher risk for problems with the vaccine. There was a controversy recently put out by Indian Country Today that was an opinion article by an expert who said that maybe more Native people were dying and not benefiting from the vaccine, the new vaccine, J&J. But again, we have to go back to focusing on risks and benefits, and also the problems with the studies they've done. Basically, it does come back to vaccine side effects do not cause morbidity, death, mortality. COVID does cause death and hospitalizations, as well as long-term effects. So nothing really compares. They're not the same.
Right.
Lately, I've been coming across a few more folks with vaccine hesitancy. And I know there's a lot of concern out there because our tribes, our nations have had a rough history with genocide and ethnocide. And so suspicion is sometimes in our second nature to be protective for our families. And so there is a suspicion about vaccines and myths about vaccines, but I really encourage people to speak with a trusted healthcare provider who does understand the vaccine and get good information rather than conspiracy theories about these vaccines. Because again, we get back to the risks and benefits. Vaccine, protection, or death. You know, we died from smallpox, infected blankets. We died from bacteria and viruses we were never exposed to when the Europeans came. And many of those tools were used to wipe out our people. We have an opportunity to get the vaccine, which will help us to continue through the generations. As our nations are starting to get stronger, traditionally, linguistically, everything is coming back. And yet now with COVID, we have lost so many elders and culture keepers. We can't afford to lose anyone. And of course, we can't afford to lose any family members.
Absolutely. Wonderfully said. And I think that point, one of the purposes of this show is to get that point out there and to share this. And we want to thank you. This is extremely powerful to have a fellow Native American doctor who's spent your lifetime working on these things. And I think your message is going to be powerful, and we're excited to get this out and make a difference in our community. And we will gather again, and we will be holding hands, singing and dancing. So these are all the little steps that we have to take to get there.
We are honored to have you on our very first episode. This has been such an informative talk, and we just really appreciate you being here, Dr. Martinez.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate being here too.
We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we would love to hear from you.
Do you have any questions that we didn't answer? You can submit your video questions to us at epicenter@crib.org. That information will be in our description. Video your questions and you might be featured on our next episode.
Thanks for watching.